South Africa's leading mobile operator Vodacom reported a 6.9% increase in headline earnings per share for the 6 months ended 30 September 2011. It reported basic earnings per share of 301 cents from 300 cents in 2010, impacted by impairment losses of 318 million rand. Vodacom declared an interim dividend of 260 cents per share. Their customer numbers rose 21.1% to 28.9 million.
Market cap is 133 billion, price earnings 13.1, dividend yield 6.1. Chris, let's come to you first. Headline earnings up 6.9%, not bad, but when your customer base is growing 20%, I would look for a lot more for it to flow through to the top.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people were looking for low single digits. It's coming in slightly
low
than that. Yeah, okay. Very low, yeah. Bear in mind, this is a company that, along with MTN, is approaching some sort of maturity.
Yeah.
And you can take that comment whichever way you like. I mean, yes, there's some growth left in it in certain geographical jurisdictions, as there is with MTN. But generally speaking, a company that's paying out so much in the way of earnings by way of dividend, has to be approaching maturity. So, you're not going to be looking for the kind of 20-30% that you might have looked for in the past.
Chris, they managed to reduce their net debt from 10.6 billion rand, from 11.7 rather to 10.6 billion rand. Let's get your comment on the restructuring of the debt and the establishment of a 10 billion rand domestic medium-term note program and the inaugural issue of 750 million rand in the 3-month program.
Well, I think it should be quite successful because it's got such solid cash flows and ultimately this is a company that one would expect over time that where it would squeeze growth out is actually to pay some of its debt down. At the end of the day, the debt should trade at a reasonable premium. I think this is a world where our yield is at a premium in any case. And that, when you look at the dividend yield, I think there's still a huge amount of growth potential. But Vodacom was in a cage. In a sense, it still is with its parent.
It's restricted to the countries it can operate in, and that's the big advantage MTN's got over Vodacom.
Exactly. That's but that means that Vodacom is more like a utility. In other words, it produces reliable, decent cash flows. I would think, though, it's the expanded value-add services where I think there's still a huge amount of growth left, where it's not just voice, it's also data, etc. And that is a little bit more difficult. I think Vodacom probably still has some investment to make in the infrastructure. It's got the advantage of being the leader in their space in the market, and it's a very difficult position to knock off. So they've got a huge advantage in that sense, and in other words, what one would say is a barrier to entry, as it were, because of that dominant market share. But does it, can it actually unlock that growth? That would be interesting to see, because, as I say, the sky should be the limit with
Chris, you said approaching maturity 100%. Chris Hart mentions data, that's the new growth. Cost them 3.5 billion in terms of capex, 83% increase in South Africa, 68% in the rest of their markets. The trick being is I see one thing happening with data, pressure on price, just left, right and centre. And they do become a true utility. The data is a commodity and you're going to make money off it by selling tons of it at tiny, tiny margins.
Yes, no, you're quite right. And if you look at what Vodacom's been doing over the past 6 months, a year, 18 months, they've been gradually giving you much more bang for your buck. Well, not much more, but a bit more bang for your buck, so that you're paying the same kind of...
But you get a little bit more.
That's right. Look, as things stand at present, we're still paying ludicrously way over the odds for data compared to the developed world. I mean, and compared to many parts of Africa as well. Yeah. We're very expensive, and who do we have to thank for that? We have to thank Telkom in the main. We'll come on to that later, I guess. So Vodacom is sitting in a very nice position because it's been able to fill that gap that the landline operator should have filled many, many years ago had it been a globally competitive company. But it wasn't, so they've come and they filled it nicely. But you're quite right, I think the prices are going to come down, or if they're not going to come down, then you're going to get more bandwidth
go up
for your actual same payment.
Chris Hart, I know there hasn't been a definitive statement coming out around the rumour that MTN wants to acquire Vodacom's operations in the DRC, but could we get your take around this speculation? Because MTN already has a very strong footprint in the African continent relative to Vodacom.
Yeah.
So are they perhaps suggesting something around the company's geographic strategy?
It would be interesting to, because I would have thought that Vodacom would have had its has got deep enough pockets to actually establish that market, but I think the DRC is probably too rich as your first foray into Africa, just because it's not socially or even politically stable, and MTN probably would be able to leverage that space off a bit better than Vodacom at this stage, because it's got a broader footprint and that. But having said that, an exit by Vodacom from the DRC will basically ask, where's the next growth market? The DRC has enormous potential if they can just get everybody to stop fighting and just settle down and start building the country. Very, very difficult because of the different competing forces and a weak central government that's unable to really administer the entire country, because it's a vast country as well, with, as I say, sparse resources to run, and that makes it very difficult for the operator, to actually get a stable platform, that they're not going to be vandalized and whatever. And of course get electricity and other services to the sites, and that's the difficulty. But nevertheless, the DRC in a large population, bigger than South Africa's, and if the DRC joins the growth story in Africa, it may well be the wrong market to enter. It's just that you've entered in that market maybe too early.
Chris, staying with you, what about mobile operators as banks? We see M-Pesa in Tanzania, 2.2 million customers. We know in Kenya that's how money moves around. I've always thought that this was the best way to move something from A to B, was simply airtime. Yeah. I'm not sure they necessarily want to get banking licenses. I'm not sure the banks want to get telco licenses, or maybe they do. I don't know. Peter Ace and Michael Jordan teaming up.
Exactly. The key thing is you can't separate utility and technology. I think that's the wrong way to go. Ultimately, transactional functionality is going to have to merge with the technology. The one reason why South Africa has such a strong IT sector is because of two sectors that are robust, and that's telecoms and banking. That's basically why we've got a strong IT sector. That's and at the end of the day, to try and segment it may be the wrong way to go. We've already seen that it can work where banks and retailers can get together because of the footprints that either have, and it just would not make sense to me at all to say this is an area that should be left vacant. A competitor will go in there, so the better to take first mover advantage as soon as possible, to my mind.
Staying with you then, Chris Hart, would you say Vodacom is a hot stock or not?
I think so. It's a 6% dividend yield, and I think it's a secure dividend yield. It's hot. Yield is one of those things that is going to be difficult to come by. I think there is still some growth on that. It might not be super sexy growth, but at the end of the day, this is a solid company that you can put in the bottom drawer.
Solid company for Chris Hart. Chris Gilmour, Vodacom, hot or not for you?
From the perspective of, is it going to rise 20-30% over the next 6 months? Probably not. But I think, just to endorse what Chris Hart said, from the dividend yield perspective, it is really, really nice indeed. And in this type of market, when people are chasing yield, I would say it was hot, but qualified in the sense that it's hot from a dividend perspective.
Simon Brown, it seems like these interim results came in below market expectations. Around 10:30 this morning, the share was down 1.1%. They closed today down 0.7% to 88.51 rands. How do you feel about Vodacom, hot or not?
It's completely and absolutely boring, and I'm taking what Chris said. It is a approaching maturity. That sounds like my grandmother or something like that. But the spin-off here is that, unlike my grandmother, this gives me a 6.1% dividend yield, and that's quite exciting. If you're looking for dividend yield, this one's probably pretty secure, and there's where you're gonna find a really good dividend yield. We're seeing a lot of stocks with good dividend yields. This one especially good. Would I rush out and buy it? Short answer, no. I think there are other telcos out there. So if you want dividend, it's hot. If you don't, not hot for you.
Not hot for Simon Brown. Well, South Africa has the most developed telecommunications network in Africa, so let's turn our attention to this thriving sector now.
We'll start with some MTN, the big one here, 253 billion, a dividend yield of 4.6. Chris, these really, I mean, in South Africa, MTN might be the small player, but in those 21 countries, they're giving me a decent dividend yield, but they're giving me what Chris said Vodacom doesn't offer, which is that possibility for, of course, comes with a little bit of risk, but they've managed it so far.
I think they've managed that risk quite well, and I think MTN is probably one of your better examples of what I call a 21st century telecommunications company, because it's got a broad footprint, and what governments increasingly do not, when I say increasingly, I don't think they are anywhere remotely aware, especially when you look at our own telecommunication regulatory structure, aware that the technology in any case has overtaken them completely, in the sense that you can disintermediate somebody's regulatory structure completely.
That's what we saw in North Africa, Middle East in the spring, earlier in the year.
Exactly. You can run a telecommunications company from Botswana, if you like, and offer telecommunication services. You can do it by satellite, whatever. It might just be too expensive now, but the technology exists. And this is, to my mind, MTN is one of those examples which said, can we develop a greater global hub, not just for Africa, but for the world, by having a sensible regulatory structure that actually recognizes the brave new world that we're in, and actually said, instead of just 3 or 4, why not 6 or 7, etc., that do actually have a global footprint, and that can actually bring our costs down, because the costs of data and telephony is a major barrier to entry, and cost of doing business, and unnecessarily so, because you can still have a thriving telecommunications company, but with lower costs. We've seen this around the world, and where you've had legacy government-owned utilities, you have these particular problems.
Chris Gilmour, let's get your take now on the broadcasting digital migration strategy in South Africa and what the likely impact is going to be on the country's telco players. Chris Hart obviously mentioning some of the barriers to entry with the high data pricing, etc. How do you feel about this regulatory imposition on the telco players?
So basically you're talking about going from analog
to digital.
It's happening all over the world. It's going to happen here. Different here to many other countries in the sense that you've got a great deal of price sensitivity. So when you tell people that who've been able to put a kind of coat hanger out and get a signal, now all of a sudden you're going to have to pay 500 rands to get a new signal, and they're going to balk at it, and it's not funny, particularly at this point in time. But it's going to happen, obviously, and governments all over the world get involved in this, because the amount of available bandwidth around the world is limited. So you have to be able to compress that data into a digital format to be able to keep on functioning, basically. That's why they get involved. So yes, it's going to happen, but it keeps on getting pushed out further and further and further. And I think at some point in time we've got to say, you know what, guys, we've got to get this done. Whether we subsidize these sets to the nth degree for low-income families so they can actually watch television, however we do it, there's got to be a smart technological answer to this.
Talking the desktops, I mean, Altec, Allied Technology is one of the companies who might be in that space. They're having a tough time of it. I mean, their Autopage Cellular, which has been almost, over 60% of their revenue. And again, it comes to that point, we're seeing average revenue per user is getting squeezed down. We're seeing huge competition and churn happening. Churn happens left, right, and centre. Yeah. Their move into East Africa didn't quite go as well. So, in a sense, you sit back and you think telecoms, telecommunications, wonderful sector, but certainly there are tough parts of it, and Altec's having some of those tough parts.
No, you're right. I think what will eventuate from all of this, and it's happening in many parts of the developed world, is that you're going to start getting all of your content delivered via the internet or via a telephone line or whatever. I mean, for example, if you go to the UK, you still get a satellite dish for Sky, but most people are now getting it down the telephone line. They're getting the content there.
One cable in, everything comes through.
Exactly. Now, let's not be too unfair to Telcom. Some years ago, they were talking about going that route, and with Telcom Media, it just didn't work. I think they did see the big picture. Unfortunately, that kind of convergence hasn't happened here. One of the reasons being that our structure, our landline structure, has been allowed to erode and decay over the years.
That's the copper in the ground.
Correct. So, you know, it's problematic. I think that's the kind of technology I'm talking about, though, whereby you get this huge set of convergence allowing so many different features to come down one single channel, and therefore it means that everything becomes that much more efficient.
Chris Hart, is it going to be the revolution? It's going to be fibre to the home. Now, we sit here in the biggest country in the continent, or biggest city in the continent rather, and we haven't got fibre. There's folks out there who's sitting in little villages in Scotland who probably got fibre to the home.
Exactly. It is an investment that does need to be made. Unfortunately, it's one of those things. I would suspect sooner or later, because not only is the data expensive, it's also of poor quality when you talk about speed, and what we talk about fast broadband is actually quite slow, elsewhere.
The Koreans laugh at our fast broadband,
and it's not stable either. It's not particularly stable. Certainly my experience, and that means that we've got a good backbone somewhere, but it needs to be now, in a sense, brought together. And this might be, I would still blame the regulatory structure where it was compartmentalized and deconstructed, and you've got a nice little cozy oligarchy in the, protected by regulation, etc. And I think that's why, although there's, a competition, it's limited competition. It's not open competition, and that to me is where we've gone wrong.
It sounds like the telecom sector in SA is not too hot for you then, Chris Hart.
The sector is, to me it is hot. All right, if we could just improve the regulatory structure, I think there's an enormous amount of growth and investment that can take place, because in a sense we've been held back. There's an opportunity to leapfrog in a sense as well because of that, and I think we need to be taking the plunge.
Chris Gilmour, if we review the regulatory framework within the SA telecom sector, would you then say that it's hot and concur with Chris Hart?
I concur with Chris 100%. I think the potential is absolutely enormous, but we're hobbling along, and we're working at like 5% capacity. We could really expand our minds and get over these ridiculous barriers, these self-imposed barriers. Then it's a phenomenally hot sector.
Simon Brown, before you tell us whether SA Telecoms as a sector is hot or not, why don't you give us your view on the delisting of Vox Telecoms, what the likely impact is going to be on the telecom space?
I think relatively small. They were really in the least cost routing, and that's getting squeezed out with the call termination rates being that glide path to take it down. So really the product they were offering isn't there so much anymore. They were then moving into networks, and I think that's the exciting place, private networks and the like, and that's really what's exciting going forward and what we need to look at. I think it's a hot sector in the sense that, I mean, we've got companies out there like MTN and Vodacom, global players. MTN, absolutely global player. We've got Blue Label Telecoms, who might be relatively small at only 4 billion, but they're doing stuff which is globally exciting. Telkom, I think Telkom's a bit of an inhibitor. The KT Corporation, who might take a 20% stake and has done fibre in the homes in Korea, I'm hoping they come here and I'm first in line for fibre.